Nigeria's inflation rate is on course to rise to its highest in more than 18 years in December, dampening Christmas spending for cash-strapped consumers. This soaring inflation is expected to spur the Central Bank of Nigeria to raise its benchmark interest rates in its next meeting. The Monetary Policy Committee last met in July when it increased the rates to the eighth straight time to about 18.75%. And according to the National Bureau of Statistics, consumer prices rose to a fresh 18-year high of 28.20% in November. And economists say the fuel subsidy removal and the depreciation in value of the naira will continue to add to inflation through second-round effects. Gospel Obele, our chief economist, Streetnomics, is our guest on the show, and he will be talking to us more as regards this. Thank you so much, Gospel, for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Nick. Good morning.
Now, Nigeria's inflation rate is projected to reach its highest point by December. We're looking at the highest points, basically. So what do you make of the rates at which the general price levels of goods and services increased this year? In some quarters, it is said to have been astronomical. And I'm asking you, was it something that you were expecting to happen in 2023?
Yes, it was something that we're expecting, because you have a double challenge, that we're dealing here. You have the global context, which heavily pressured on the local economy. Lots and lots of economies globally are now trying to get out of it. However, you also have an already existing fundamental challenge in our local economy. A lot of policy somersaults, policy incoherence, and all that, leading up onto the elections. It was quite a very busy year for us. And it was unfortunate that, within the context of the events that happened since last year and even 2 years ago, leading up until now locally, it has impacted heavily on prices of goods and services and the rate at which those prices have been constantly increasing. Safe enough to say that when the new administration also came into office, there were a lot of hasty decisions that were made earlier on the first few weeks, and some of those decisions further worsened, the state of the local economy. So it's more or less, like I mentioned, two strands of events, one on the global level, but a lot more at the local level. Because if we're doing local economics right or pacing local economics right, we'll probably have been able to, manage the shocks from the global context. However, maybe not in a sustainable way, because again, we're not yet a productive economy.
Now, the CBN is expected to raise its benchmark interest rate in response to the soaring inflation. But when you look at it, this is what the Apex Bank has always done. This is what Apex banks across the world always do. And of course, the effort is channeled at making borrowing more money expensive. And that's also to help slow down economic activities in countries where we have issues like this, most especially issues of inflation coming into play. But we see that in Nigeria, that particular effort has proved abortive. So why is that so, despite monetary policy tightening?
Yeah, so on two legs. Number one, you have the fact that many policies cannot really thrive, within the context of conventional economics, if the economy itself is not productive enough to take the weight of that policy. So if you grow interest rates, what you're trying to do is to tighten the economy. And technically, it means that the cost of borrowing will increase. Now, the cost of borrowing in an economy where access to finance is already a major fundamental challenge for MSMEs, all right? That tells you that it is going to be huge ripple effect on the doing business environment when it comes to production, manufacturing, small businesses accessing raw materials and all of that. So, and even accessing funding, the cost of accessing funding will be, way higher. So when you double up all these dynamics, the fact that there are huge productivity gaps, it tells you that most of these policies will not necessarily make a significant impact in the short to medium term, within a local economy like Nigeria. However, when you take it also to the global context, it's safe to say that in 2027, use analogy a lot, in 2027, global economic variables will lead to a global recession and global inflation. But in 2019, leading up until 21, 22, 23, and what we've seen that global health risk, global geopolitics, and all of these rising globalization-based events are leading directly to inflation. And that's to tell us that we're now fighting a war that is not really in direct proportion to how conventional economics will think. So the idea will now be dealing with an inflation that is non-monetary in nature will require both the basic use of monetary instruments like interest rates at a very necessary level, but a more sufficient level will be rethinking the approach to solving inflation. All right. So whilst interest rates are okay and good, they are not enough to deal with the type of inflation we are faced with right now, especially taking into context the gross lack of productivity dynamics right in the Nigerian economy.
Now, high inflation is said to erode purchasing power. I want to tie that to how Nigerians would be feeling right now and what they're to expect, of course, as we gravitate towards the end of the year. This actually makes difficult consumers when it comes to purchasing basic necessities. Now, the festive season is here. Food inflation has risen to about 32.84%. How do you think this will impact holiday spending for Nigerians at this particular time?
I mean, it's already impacting spending. When you think of the fact that people now have to spend more portions of their income to feed, it already tells you that you have more monies going back again into circulation. It's like a give and take situation. So you already have inflation in the economy plus a rising cost of living. And if you look at the pressure points through which inflation permeates the Nigerian economy, they're largely on food, shelter, education, transport, and healthcare. All right. And these are the very basic people need to at least have a life on a daily basis. So if people are spending more portions of their income trying to feed, trying to move from point A to point B, it technically means that people have lesser parts of their income or even lesser monies, or if not any money, they don't even have any money available to fund their dreams and aspirations, or do basic form of investments that will enable their lives bounce back. So people's lives, the quality of life is literally at the mercy of the rising inflationary impact, especially the hike in food and transportation, or in the hike in price of food and transportation. What that will lead is sort of feeding the vicious cycle of poverty, meaning that more people are likely to get, into the poverty trap because more and more of their income, all right, is being spent on basic necessities, and the disposable income is shrinking, and they may not be able to afford the quality and quantity, the right proportion of food that they need, all right, to improve the quality of their health or livelihood, as the case may be. So when you look at this context, the average Nigerian is literally on the borderline of poverty, not because they are not making more monies, but the money they are making on the level of income that they're currently at right now is being faced with higher prices of goods and services, which they have to interface with on a daily basis in the context of food and transportation. So I mean, this is not a sustainable situation. It's really bad. And it's, so unfortunate that Nigerians have to go through such severe pain, especially in the times we live in.
Now, one thing we may need to also consider is the depreciation and the scarcity of the naira. Now, when you look at it, the naira is about 1,260 to the dollar, and now there's even a cash crunch. That particular tender is not even in circulation. So, what do you think the CBN should be doing at this particular time? Because they said that the reason that Nigerians are witnessing cash crunch is because they're trying to mop up excess liquidity in circulation to deal with inflationary pressures or inflation that is in the country. And I'm wondering, is that the right thing to be done at this time when everybody's entering the festive period? People would be into buying a lot of things, goods, of course, to celebrate with. So is that a policy or a directive that should come into play now?
Yeah, there are two parts of this whole situation, and I've mentioned a couple of times that the way Nigeria is right now, it's like a trade-off dynamics. All right, you can't have one policy without having the other, or you can't have a policy without having a severe side effect, because we've also underestimated, and it's quite unfortunate because we've underestimated how bad things are really gone. That nobody's holding anybody responsible. All right, so the central bank is also faced in a very complex curve, to curb inflation. And the understanding the central bank has is largely conventional, that it's a game of too much money in circulation. All right. Now, and you have all that moving narrative. All right. And also safe to say that there are a lot of arguments on the former naira design policy and all that. So for me, you also can't take away the fact that this is a festive season. So there's even going to be more money being spent in circulation, and then you're faced with the currency crunch. So it's two things. Number one will be to incentivize, e-transactions, online transactions, transfers, and all that. Incentivize more people to do that. That's on the side of the central bank. Now, on the side of the market will be to work closely with key stakeholders who are faced with that exposure and sort of increasing the prices in the market as well, because they are producers. Map out producers who are constantly faced with the core raw material issue, and then begin to look for interesting interventions to support them at that level, so that by the time products move from factory to market, right, there is a reduced costing impact for the average Nigerian. So I think on the grounds of working with stakeholders, to find early wins and places where you can launch interventions that will be much more productive, not just only rolling out palliatives and all of that. Those things are very good, but they are not so sustainable because people are faced with market realities. So to tame market realities, you have to now, move further up on the value chain to sort of, engage with the stakeholders who are constantly making these decisions by virtue of the realities they are also faced with. So push interventions in that block, support more producers and middlemen within the value chain to deal with these excesses that they're faced with or challenges they're faced with, so that this is to just ensure that prices are relatively stable in the context of the moving inflationary dynamics we're faced with globally, safe to say. Yeah.
Okay,
so
let me
it
just
has to be
quickly.
a balance up of two ends, because it's a trade-off situation.
Okay, so let me quickly just get your final thoughts on this, your reaction. Now, the IMF has urged the Apex Bank to increase interest rates. The World Bank has echoed the same sentiments, even suggesting that the fuel price should be increased to about 750 naira. Now, of course, the MPC meeting will be in a couple of probably weeks, a month thereabouts, and the CBN governor has come out to say that the committee has penciled an interest rate hike of 400 basis points to about 22.75%. So what's your thoughts on that?
Well, the central bank is the central bank. I would have really, really loved to advise, a different approach. Like I mentioned, interest rates are good, but they are not sufficient. So no matter how high you increase it, or if you keep increasing it, it's sort of chasing the shadows context that we are faced with in Nigeria. So there has to be an alternative idea. There has to be an alternative solution, an alternative policy in sync with the fiscal policies, in sync with like the interventions I made an example of previously, working with producers in the value chain. There has to be a sync of different policies to deal with this narrative. I personally think that interest rates should be on hold for now. I don't think it's the best of times to keep increasing your interest rates when your currency is constantly on a free fall. All right, so there's going to be a lot of cost pressure, because with higher interest rates will also come higher cost of borrowing, and with a failed productive base, that would also attract higher transfer cost on the value chain, and the final consumer will be faced with further increased cost of yams and bread and all that. So I don't forget that Nigeria also have a possibility of sort of artificial scarcity of things. All right, once there's hike in interest rate and people understand how those things work in terms of increasing the price of an item, even sectors the thing doesn't primarily concern, you find that producers and co are increasing prices because people want to also gain the situation.
Okay.
Right? So there need to be careful with the use of these two sets, being the cultural ideology and the market stance that we have right now in the Nigerian economy.
Well, Gospel Abele, Chief Economist at Streetonomics, thank you so much for your contribution.
Yeah.